Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Say, did you hear about that big immigration march in Birmingham? Me neither. You see, there have been a lot of people who have been trying to rewrite the history of the United States, particularly the huge chapter that foundational Black Americans contributed to it. Everything good, everything progressive, everything moral and decent about this country has been the sole result of our effort and no one else's. There's not a brag, it's just a simple fact. Everything, and I mean every single little thing that the rest of the world thinks of as being decent and moral and right about the United States was the result of our efforts. There was no freedom of speech in this country until we were the ones who stepped forward to speak the unspoken. And when it comes to moral movements in this country, there's not a single one of them that has not been the result of our effort, not even one. And yet you've had everybody who's tried to claim that they've been involved with, or in many cases they've tried to even claim that they inspired us. There was nobody to inspire us. Everybody's been fighting against us. In the 20th century with the civil rights movement, that was us out there. We were the ones taking the slings, arrows, and often bullets and bombs. They came along with challenging white supremacy. Everybody else was trying to find a comfortable place under it. A lot of them thought that they already had. So they were not involved. That's just a fact. And we can tell the proof of that because now when it comes time for them to actually decide that they're going to be trying to stop all of this mass deportation, they just can't do it. You want to know why? Because they don't have a tradition of fighting white supremacy. They don't have a tradition of standing up to established power in this country. They do, however, have a very strong, long-standing tradition of going along with white supremacy. They have a tradition of going along with the established order, not of actually fighting it. And that's the reason why whenever they do try, it usually turns out to be dysfunctional. And the white supremacists know this. After decades of repeating all of the anti-Black rhetoric and tropes and freely repeating and engaging in all of those anti-Black talking points, the same folks who now are saying that they got a problem with what it is that these white supremacists in power are doing, those bigots are looking and saying, do you actually expect us to take you seriously after you spent so long carrying water for our agenda and doing everything that you could to back it up? Now all of a sudden you want us to take you seriously when you're saying, oh, these white supremacists, you guys are doing something wrong now. No, that's not the way the game works. This is the reason why I and others have said there is simply no substitute for the moral legitimacy that we represent. You're not going to be able to get out there and decide to do an imitation civil rights movement because Black people have already shown the world the real thing. And besides, any attempt to call themselves copying what we did, it will never be seen as legitimate unless we say it is. That's the reason why every single movement in this country has always had people demanding that Black people lend their voices to it, even though the majority of these causes had nothing to do with us and all of them told us to kiss their behinds afterwards. And yet everybody wants for us to lend our voice to theirs because there's no substitute for moral legitimacy. And that's what we're seeing today. You have a number of individuals and voices, people who are claiming that somehow they've got a Black publication or other, and yet here they are trying to tell us that we have some sort of obligation to lend our voices to causes and other groups who have never lent their voices to us. People talking about how, well, Trump's mass migration, these policies, they're going to be affecting Black Americans. This is an argument presented in bad faith. To take Black Americans and conflate that as being the same as illegal immigrants, that is a real danger to us, more than any alleged mass migration threat. Is Trump a danger to the legal Africans and the legal Caribbean immigrants? If so, I'd like to be the first to point out where Candace Owens is and have her on the first thing smoking out of the United States. But that's not the case at all, and let's be honest, even under the best of circumstances, Trump's mass deportations will turn out to be more sizzle than steak. Yes, reportedly illegal crossings at the border are at historic lows, but given how many were allowed in during the Biden years, that may well be a meaningless fact. And for people to try to bring up racial profiling as some sort of specter for us to be scared of, as if we didn't already have that before now, apparently some people who would call themselves informing our sensibilities, they apparently think that racial profiling didn't exist until this year. And a number of these African immigrants, by the way, wind up working at these prisons and other incarcerated facilities. Now, that's part of the story that doesn't get told. Many of these immigrants, by the way, have been happy cogs in the machine of anti-Black racism because as far as they were concerned, they classify themselves as immigrants, so that gives them a pass. And now the white power is going to begin targeting them to be fed into that very machine. Apparently, we're supposed to be sad or scared for a situation that has been allowed to go on all this time with the eager participation of the individuals who are now being targeted by the very machine that they fueled and built and maintained and promoted. This is why just because someone's not on a white media cable station or they're not on the payroll at some white-owned website, that doesn't mean that they're speaking for the black grassroots. A lot of the black publications of the 20th century were, in many cases, black people who were looking for some broad-based, well-funded movement to counter white supremacy in the U.S. And a lot of these black journalists in the 20th century and even black intellectuals, they found themselves susceptible to Marxist organizations' talking points as a result of this. Even the Black Panthers were embracing that to a large degree, but Marxism was a Trojan horse because the white left embraces the same anti-black racism as the white right. The only problem that the left has is that they're not part of the establishment. That's the issue they've got. And you're not going to talk your way around white supremacy by trying to pretend that it's a class issue. That only applies with white society because class is the dividing line among them. It has nothing to do with us. Don't believe it? Ask Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, Puff Daddy, Michael Jackson. Ask them if their income and their status and class happen to protect them against the legal system. Now look at all of these individuals who are white males who have been accused of God knows what, and yet nothing's being done about them at all. It's not about class, it's about race. The system doesn't care about your class, it cares about your color. Because you can have some poor white man who has all sorts of legal immunity from law. Meanwhile, you have a black man who's wealthy as the day is long, and yet he can be jammed up 5 ways from Sunday, simply on a mere accusation. Doesn't have to prove it, just an accusation is all it takes. Trying to cast the black struggle as part of some global fight, that was always going to be a losing proposition because nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody on this planet, is fighting white supremacy except for us. Even countries and radical groups who you see fighting the U.S. or the West in general, be it China or some sort of Middle Eastern organization, they're not fighting white supremacy. In fact, it's been these exact same countries and organizations and religious sects who have been as racist towards black people as anything you'll find in the U.S. This is why all that talk that we've had the last 80 plus years about allies and such was sheer stupidity. We have a vested interest in toppling white supremacy, but the reality is everyone else believes that they found a comfortable place under it, and so they want to maintain it. For most of them, they've rationalized and justified attacking us as a way to prove to the powers that be that they're on the team. To them, that's how they jockey for a better position under white supremacy. They know what the rules are, that there's a designated underclass, and they have to show that they're dedicated to that racial hierarchy. This is how you have a whole bunch of people who are not classified as white, and yet they turn around and fight for white supremacy. You have black people from Africa and the Caribbean, not all, but enough, who have told us to our faces for 3 generations now, I'm not black. And don't be stupid and let anyone tell you that they were only saying it because in their countries they're the majority, and so to them black means nothing, blah, blah, blah. That's a lie. These are countries that were colonized for generations by Europeans, and they were constantly reminded that they're black. What they mean is that they understand the rules of racism, and they fully recognize white supremacy would offer them a few crumbs if they played along. The white supremacy looked at them as being a political counterpoint to what we were saying. They could push them out in front of the cameras and say, hey, why, look at this black person over here that just showed up from Tobago or whatever. Why, there can't be any racism in America because, look, we gave them some token job. We gave them some little old make-work university position. Why, we went ahead and put this person on a staff somewhere, so that proves that there is no anti-black racism. And a lot of them said publicly they wanted to establish a visible reputation for distancing themselves from us. They wanted to make it clear they weren't like us. And for a while they thought it had worked. They thought they had escaped blackness. They thought white supremacy was going to give them a pass. But now the white supremacy's on the march, they're singing a different tune. When I told you 8+ years ago that a Trump presidency, while not being a help to the black empowerment movement, wouldn't be that hurtful to us either because everything that you could claim to be scared of was already happening under the Democrats, so many people were terrified. Oh, the orange man this, the orange man that, he's gonna get us, he's too dangerous. Well, he was president for 4 years. And what happened? Other than his words that may be offensive, but what did he actually do? Nothing that the Democrats hadn't already been doing. See, the differences between the two major parties are rhetorical. That's something that those of us who are the thought leaders for black empowerment understood, even if a lot of other people, well-meaning though they may be, did not understand it. When it comes to the major parties, their rhetoric is different, but their actions are the same. Now the orange man is back in the White House, and we see that the immigrants who had tried to make common cause with white supremacy and who had spent decades saying that they wanted nothing to do with us, now they're telling black Americans that we need to speak up for them. We need to be part of whatever organization or whatever protesting and marching that they're doing. This after decades of nonstop respectability politics and claiming that there was no racism. Now all of a sudden they suddenly realize that there is, at least for the moment. But that's the game that always gets played. Racism doesn't exist until white supremacy decides it's going to kick them in the keister. Then all of a sudden they say it exists for 5 minutes because they're trying to get white supremacy to let up on them. Now they need someone to speak up for them, and they're all looking around expecting us to do it because we're the only people who have ever actually taken a moral stand in this country. Everyone else is used to us doing all the heavy lifting and taking all the blows, and then they come in after and claim that they had everything to do with whatever it was that we'd accomplished. Oh, the civil rights movement? Don't you know that that wasn't just black people? Why? All these other groups, they were just as important. They were just as involved. In fact, they were more involved. It's just that black people just simply hogged the camera time, don't you know? That's what people were saying. Well, a few of them are trying to get something going on their own now, but we see how that's working out. They get out there, but there's only a few of them, and it's not making a difference. You have immigrants marching in Birmingham, but none of them black. You look at those pictures, that's what you see. During the Biden years, you had people like Cedric Richmond who were cheerleading for immigrants and ignoring his own black constituents in Louisiana. People like Karen Bass and Stephen Reed and all of these other bootlick politicians. Richmond was hoping to put together a political support base of non-black donors and voters so that he could seek higher office without having to be vulnerable to black voters' demands. That's the only freedom he wanted. He wanted freedom from having to listen to what black people are demanding. To Cedric Richmond and the rest of these black sellout politicians, black voters are the real opponents that he's running against, not the GOP. Well, those immigrants who thought that Cedric Richmond would be representing them, they're getting a wake-up call because Cedric is MIA. They thought that he was some sort of ally to them. And they're finding out what black people realized a long time ago. There are no allies under white supremacy. And these protests that they're trying to do, they're not going to accomplish anything. FBAs are what makes movements work in America. But the movements and organizations we've put together have been undermined from within by tethers. Look at the CBC as a prime example, but not the only one. Black student organizations that in the past have been generating real leaders for the future, they've basically been utterly destroyed by tethers now. The universities have been overrun by tethers who came in there and first thing on their mind was, we're going to undermine all of these groups and get rid of them, or at the very least, we're going to turn them into social clubs for our own personal benefit. And they had no problem dismissing our interests and concerns, and in many cases, even openly advocating against us, all the time telling everyone that they had nothing in common with us. That's white supremacy in the raw for you. Having it both ways, taking both sides of the conversation. And these were the main people who were trying to terrify you about Trump, by the way, because they saw him as a temporary inconvenience to whatever goals they were trying to pursue in the Democratic Party. They wanted you to be scared because the truth is they were scared. There's nothing that they want you to be scared of that hasn't been happening for 150 years. And if these immigrants were allied with us, then that would affect us. But as it stands, they've insulted us and in many cases taken part in attacking us. Propaganda like this tries to make us all out to be one and the same, but these immigrant groups have done everything they can to separate themselves from us. While it is true that many Africans, perhaps a majority, have not been with the BS, it's undoubtedly true that a majority of those who have come to the U.S. in the last 50 years have been. There's been a lot of people, including from African and Caribbean countries, who have been on the wrong team for the last 3 generations. They knew that white power recognized them as immigrants, and they were only too happy to play the game of, we are hardworking immigrants. We are not like those lazy akatas, quote unquote. Just give me a university job or a token corporate job. And then they can turn around and say that their so-called success, quote unquote, proves that there's no racism. These akatas are all just lazy. And this is what white supremacy has seen for 3+ generations. Again, this is not all Africans or Caribbeans. We got some rock-ribbed soldiers right here among us. In fact, it's not even all Africans or Caribbeans who immigrate to the U.S., but it's been a numerical majority. The Congressional Black Caucus is essentially immigrants now. Something on the order of half their membership are first or second generation immigrants, and they were selected by the DNC to be put in those positions. And it's been the white donors for the Democratic Party who have been the ones funding these CBC members. And they're also the same people who give contributions to these sock puppet organizations like Black Pac, She the People, etc., etc. Every time you look up and see some clown that you never heard of, you've never seen before, and yet they seem to have millions of dollars that are coming from white dark money organizations. That's what they've been doing for the longest time. And to think, we wonder why black politicians in D.C. haven't produced for black people since the Civil Rights Movement. It's because prior to the 60s, we defined for ourselves what constituted proper black representation. But once we got the Voting Rights Act passed, white power flooded the zone with people from outside the U.S. and then selected them to be cherry-picked and elevated into these positions, and they used their white media to say, well, these are your representatives now. This is what constitutes black representation now. Before I go any farther, this is not to say that Trump is a virtuous man. He's not. He isn't honest, he's not virtuous, and he ain't moral either. And neither are the Democrats, which is why we're not supporting either one of them. What we are doing, however, is recognizing that anti-black racism is a continuity of policy in this country, and Trump's not going to do anything towards us that we haven't seen before. However, since he's expanding the scope of his mendacity, that means a whole lot of folks who thought that they have found a comfortable, safe place under white supremacy are now going to find themselves under pressure. And that is different. All of those folks who have been spending decades claiming that they were the real muscle behind the civil rights movement, that they were just as involved as we were, and why, if it wasn't for us just hogging all the camera time, they would have been able to tell people how much they had contributed to the struggle, well, now it's time for them to prove it. People are trying to get the results that we achieve, but they're trying to do it without us, and it's not working. This won't lead to them doing an about-face, by the way, but I hope people realize that our silence is deafening. These tethers who've insinuated themselves into organizations we created and who white power funded and promoted them in the white media and tried to give them phony credibility, they're not able to stop what's happening, because without us, they have no legitimacy. This is why it's important to clarify for people what lineage these individuals come from. Without us, they would wither on the vine. And without us, white power would start throwing a lot of them out of work. You would be surprised how many Africans, especially those from Nigeria, work in the white media. And I'm not talking about in front of the camera. I'm talking about behind the camera in these executive positions. Do you think the white media made them into executives because they love Nollywood? No, the white media didn't. They did it because they recognized that these people could be tools, black faces to push an anti-black agenda. Candace Owens is from the Caribbean, but her white supremacist supporters never mentioned that. It's not because they don't know, it's because they fully understand the real reason they keep her around, precisely because she's their sock puppet. She doesn't really praise her home country, and if she started doing that, they wouldn't like it. Given that white power's on the march, she's been real closed-mouthed about her Caribbean pride, you notice. She's not keeping on reminding people that she's an immigrant. She ain't doing that anymore. She's not beating that drum anymore. See, white power believes in taking both sides of the argument. When it suits them, they'll play the hard-working immigrant line. But when white power goes in on immigrants, suddenly they stop saying that and they start saying, hey, I may have been here only a few years, but I'm as American as you. That's what's going to be said now. And dumping on black people as a way to gain some quickie credibility with the white power structure, well, that's going to be a lot less attractive these days, not because they don't want to do it. Most of these immigrants come from countries that practice rabid anti-black racism. But the reason that there's going to be a momentary lapse in all of this furious anti-black rhetoric from some of these groups is because they know that it's not going to help them in this situation. They're not going to be sitting there doing I am the hardworking immigrant, I work harder than these foundational black Americans. That ain't going to mean nothing to ICE. Trump just got through signing executive orders saying that English is the official language of the United States now. So as far as he's concerned, if you're so hardworking good, you can brush up on your English skills. That's what's going to be going on. So all of this, dumping on black people is the way to get quickie credibility and a pat on the head. That's not going to be seen as anything other than a waste of time. Again, not because they don't want to, but simply because they know that under these circumstances with these white supremacists, it's not going to mean anything. So for the folks who are out there marching and demonstrating and saying that the mass deportations need to stop, hey, keep on marching. Keep on demonstrating. But I gotta tell you, it sounds real strange when you got people pointing out, well, these black Americans, where the world are they at? They're not here. The same people who have spent 60 to 70 years saying that the black community is this, the black community is that, they don't want anything to do with black people, stay away from those black people. We have seen this across the board. Not just with immigrants who come from Asia or from Latin America, but also the ones, not all, but also most of the ones that come from Africa and the Caribbean. Everyone doing the same thing. Dumping on us as a way to say we're better than those people. And then when it comes time to fight against white supremacy, they all lay back while we do all the heavy lifting. Well, now it's time for them to start lifting. What we see is their arms and legs are pretty weak, but that's okay. All they got to do is keep demonstrating, keep marching. That'll build up those leg muscles. And if they want to know where the foundational black Americans are at, why the world is we're not out there with them, well, it's because we heard what they said. They said that we were a problem for them and they wanted to stay away from us, and we're going to oblige them. We're going to make it very easy for them to do so. We're going to be staying away and letting them handle it because they were the real muscle behind the civil rights movement. They were the reason that the civil rights movement made any progress at all. And black people were just hogging the limelight. And black people weren't doing anything for anyone other than themselves. Okay, fair enough, fine then. Well, now the stage is all theirs. And that being the case, they need to stop asking where are the black Americans at? How come there's no black Americans who come out to these demonstrations? Because whenever they ask where we're at, the only thing they're demonstrating is that they can't do without us. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. G. Mars, Keith Baker, Andrew Lewis, Richard Allen Lovell, and Zachary Jenkins. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.